I Barely Got Here is a collection of stories and conversations based on 24 years in law enforcement. You have the right to be disturbed by some of the content or disagree with the viewpoints. Anything you hear can and will be dosed with sarcasm and dark humor. You have the right to know the discussions will often be graphic with language and themes that are intended for a mature audience. Do you understand your rights? Then buckle up, Buttercup. We're going 10-8. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of I Barely Got Here. I'm your host, Kevin Booncher. Tonight's episode, End of That Crime Trend. I was working as a North Side patrol sergeant on a midnight squad in December. Midnight squads in our department work from 2100 or 9 p.m. to 0700 or 7 a.m. in the morning. Like most all patrol work weeks in larger departments, we worked a 410, which is a 4-day, 10-hour day week. This squad's work days were Thursday through Sunday. It's not the greatest shift for a family or social life, and often was staffed with newer officers and a newer sergeant, which I was at the time. In our patrol division, we had shift bids usually once a year. So shift bids are based on seniority, with the sergeants that bidding the squads first. The most senior sergeant starts, and you go down the line from there. So that said, the least senior officers and sergeants are typically left with the least desirable shifts, midnight weekends. You weren't necessarily happy about it, but there was a certain pride you would take in working that worst of the worst shift. Due to the hours, working this shift had a unique dynamic. For a couple hours toward the end of every shift, we were the only cops working the whole city. And for 3 of the 4 days we worked, there was my squad handling anything on the north side of the city and our sister squad handling anything that was on the south side of the city. So depending on vacations or sick leave, training adjustments, unexpected staffing issues, etc., one of these squad sergeants could be the only supervisor for the whole city, with only a handful of officers to do everything. I can remember more than one occasion where I was juggling 2 major incidents, one on the north side and one on the south side. You just did the best you could, and those officers all did the same. My folks, or officers from our sister squad down south, would be on some cluster of a call, and there would inevitably be some Adam Henry involved who would demand a supervisor. The officers would call me on the radio and let me know, and I'd do what I could to get down there as soon as I could to give the officers some relief, which is basically providing a different target for the frustration and the anger of that person. I'd get to the scene and identify myself to the complaining person and listen to them rant and rave about the officers, about the hose draggers, about the weather, about anything and everything. About 90% of the time, after I let them vent a little, I'd tell them that nothing was going to change. And they'd yell at me a little more, and then they'd demand to talk to my supervisor. So my folks and I were always really entertained when I could look them in the eye and tell them that I was literally the highest-ranking police supervisor in the entire city. And most of the time that ended it. I had a good squad, 6 young men and women who were all newer to the job with great attitudes and the desire to work. On the first day that I would land in any particular assignment as a supervisor, I always made it a point to explain what my expectations were. And one of the most important expectations was that you work, you do your job. In this regard, I'd explain it this way. My job should always consist of reining you in or pulling you back from working too hard or too much. I should never have to be kicking you in the ass to get you going. And I can proudly say that the vast majority of my supervision dealt with reining back, since I had such fantastic officers who worked for me over all those years. Managing 6 newer officers definitely had its challenges, but it was also some of the most rewarding work I did as a supervisor. Being able to have a positive impact on their careers and teach them something that could help keep them alive, drill into them the need for them to take care of and watch out for each other, among other things. As a newer sergeant, running a squad like this carried with it a huge learning curve, but this is invaluable for your development as a supervisor. As I said, it was December, so it was cold. Well, it was cold for Phoenix during the majority of our shifts. We gathered in the briefing room for our briefing. So briefing is where you discuss any current issues or problems, admin issues. I gauge where everybody's at on paperwork from the prior night, etc. We try to use it as often as possible to do training or discuss a particular topic, which was especially important for my younger officers. And another important aspect of a briefing was debriefing other incidents that had occurred, either with us or others, so that we could learn from it. Briefing's supposed to be about 30 minutes long, but sometimes it'd stretch to 45. much to the displeasure of dispatch, who usually began bugging me for us to go 10-8 at about the 35-minute mark. But everybody understood how it worked, and if it was slow, we took a little more time. And if we were slammed, then I'd just tell the officers, hey man, you got to go hit the street, no briefing, just start shagging calls. So tonight we had a briefing, and among the usual chatter about this or that, we discussed the rash of car burglaries at a large bar on the north side of town. There was a guy or guys or women, whoever, breaking into 4, 5, or 6 or more cars in this large parking lot at night when everybody was inside the bar, and then they'd steal car stereos or whatever else wasn't fastened down. So it's not the crime of the century, but it's something we wanted to address and stop. You go out, you have a nice night with your friends, and you come back to your car and find the window broken out and all your stuff missing. It's not the way you want to end the night. And the likelihood of getting your stuff back or catching that burglar is nearly zero, unfortunately. This bar was in a beat assigned to one of my officers, and she asked if she could work a Code 5 there to watch for those car burglary suspects. A Code 5 is basically setting up somewhere and watching something, and could be a convenience store or a place where someone lives that we're looking for, or just whatever. And you can do this from inside your car or on foot, hiding in a dark area, just wherever it seemed the most likely to be able to accomplish whatever it was you were trying to do. And some officers got really creative with this. They'd be up on a roof or laying in a ditch or using vacant apartments or houses. When you check off with a Code 5, and if your supervisor wants you to do it, it means you'll be unavailable for calls for service per that sergeant unless something else kicks out, something big. Officers can check out on a Code 5 on their own as well, but they're a lot more susceptible to being called off of it for another radio call. It wasn't too busy at the start of the shift, so I approved it, and she advised dispatch of what was going on, and she set up to watch that parking lot. She was going to park her car and set up on foot closer to one area of the parking lot that seemed like it was getting hit particularly hard. The rest of my squad was already aware of it from our briefing, and we just crossed our fingers and hoped maybe we'd get lucky. Everybody went out to load their patrol cars to go to work, and I went to work pushing paper around in my office. With 6 hard-working officers, I usually had a pretty big stack of paperwork to review and approve from the night before. The first hour or so was fairly normal, not too many calls or craziness. The cold always helped keep things a little calmer, I will say. I'd finished my work in the office and was happy to be out on the road, just monitoring the radio and MDT traffic and enjoying the cold night air. But it didn't last long. My officer, who was working that Code 5 at the bar, jumps on the radio and just starts yelling about something happened. There's a car at the bar, there's a burglary attempt, it took off, and some other things, and she was pretty excited, and it was difficult to understand all that she was saying, which isn't uncommon for something like that, especially with a newer officer. And the first thing you have to do as a supervisor is determine that a crime has occurred before we start to throw a massive amount of manpower and resources into something. Or more specifically, we allow a pursuit to begin and or continue. I could tell many stories about felonious running, not a crime, or failure to stop when you don't have to, not a crime, or fill in the blank, not a crime. All of which I had done when I was a young rookie cop, but, you learn. For the pursuit issue, the days of pursuing vehicles for things as simple as a traffic violation or a nonviolent misdemeanor are pretty much over. Far too many people have been hurt or killed, not to mention loss of property and possessions over useless and, quite frankly, unnecessary vehicle pursuits. The public's not okay with it anymore, and law enforcement realizes it just needed to be put into check. There's a lot more to be said on the topic, but you get the idea. So according to my officer, we had a crime. Sounded like a vehicle burglary, nonviolent, low-class felony that more than likely pleads out to something even less if we do catch him. Non-pursuit worthy, easy call. Nobody had gotten near the last location of the fleeing suspect vehicle, so I didn't need to address it yet and kept just gathering other info and letting her give it. We listen as she gives us a direction of travel and vehicle description. She relays all that info, and the vehicle is heading south from the bar towards the ASU golf course and practice fields area. As soon as she had come on the radio with the traffic, everyone working the north side who could was dropping what they're doing and heading that way. In my mind, we have burglary suspects. She said there are at least 2 men in the car who had either attempted or committed a crime at the bar. I don't think I had put it out to not get into a pursuit with it, but a couple of units were closing in on the last location we thought they were driving in, so I was getting ready to key the mic to just kick that out. But then the kicker. The officer at the bar says she fired a round at one of the suspects in the car after he displayed a firearm at her when she essentially interrupted this crime, Well, that changes things, obviously. She doesn't think she hit him, doesn't think that they shot at her, but she's also not sure. Well, now we've gone from nonviolent, low felony to an aggravated assault, threat of violence, high-class felony. Pursuit's back on the board, and it's actually highly probable if and when we locate this car. So this has turned out to be a good one. As I drive toward the area, I hear a couple different units closing in as well, and one says he thinks he can see the vehicle. He says he's eastbound on a major road that's fairly wide open and lightly driven at that time of the night, and the car is driving at a high rate of speed. The officer said he's about a half mile back and is only seeing the taillights of the car, but it's flying. So flying, or high rate of speed, professionally, in this case turns out to be about 90 miles an hour, which is what they were doing and which is double the speed limit for that road. My officer later told me he was pedaled down also and he was barely catching up with it. So we have a car with at least a couple of morons stealing people's stuff. They've been caught stealing people's stuff. They've been shot at by the cops and are now fleeing from the cops. Unfortunately for them, this was only the beginning of the end. Well, they never saw it coming. Suspect vehicle's driving 90 miles an hour, eastbound on that same road, coming up to a major intersection. The driver of that car didn't even pause as he approached the red light for their direction of travel. Unfortunately for them, the fully loaded UPS semi-truck and trailer was driving south into that same intersection at the same time. And that truck was loaded up. It was weighing about 80,000 pounds in total, which is 40 tons. The average medium-sized passenger car, like that of our crooks, weighs about 4,000 pounds, or 2 tons. So you can see where this is going. You couldn't have timed the accident any better if you tried. The suspect car, doing 90, enters the intersection going eastbound against a red light, and the UPS truck, going south at about 45 miles an hour, T-bones this car as it goes through the green light. One of my officers calls it out on the radio, hey, we got a 962 at McClintock and Rio, which is the intersection. A 962 is a vehicle wreck with injuries, and based on what he saw, he knew that that was at least what we had going. You know, when it's dark and you're a distance away and there's a really violent wreck like this, most of what you see is just headlights and taillights making like these abrupt changes in direction and silhouettes of vehicles bouncing and flying around. And then there's always like smoke. It's just a combination of destroyed engines and leaking, steaming coolant, skidding tires, dragging across asphalt, and just the dirt and road grit that gets just flung in the air. So I'm still driving toward the wreck, which isn't far as I had been closing in on that general area also. I'm listening to the radio, throwing out some direction to various officers and telling the original officer, hey, you need to stay at the bar where the shooting occurred so that you can preserve the crime scene, or whatever crime scene that we have up there. I'm trying to get another supervisor to respond to the bar scene to help manage it while I go to the wreck. I'm watching the info come in over the MDT. Other officers are chiming in to go to one of the other scenes to help. And dispatch is kicking out info via the radio and the MDT. So if this sounds like a lot of things to do while you're trying at the same time to drive your vehicle in excess of the speed limit at night, it is. And if you're a supervisor, you're listening to the other officers, talking on the radio, reading the MDT, jumping to other channels, driving, and back then, when I was chewing tobacco, you had to manage your spit bottle so it didn't spill on you. I know, nasty, but just setting the scene. All the while trying to plan and strategize as things are unfolding and plan what you're going to do when you get there and what you need other people to do. From my experience and training, I know that humans don't multitask very well, but I will say that you can learn to do it better. And you really have no choice. Well, let's look at the hose dragger side of this conundrum. The captain, which is my equivalent as a sergeant, never drives anywhere by himself. Not calls, not to the grocery store, not on ice cream runs, not on charity event runs, etc. They always run 4 deep to anything, except I do know that now fire is implementing some 2-person trucks for some medical stuff, but that's still in the minority. The captain's the front passenger in that big red or yellow truck that you see driving around, and he essentially runs the truck and the people in it. No driving, he just gets to focus on the call, get his gear ready, and look good all the way. The BCs, or the battalion chiefs, have drivers also, so we always used to give these guys crap about having chauffeurs. Don't hate the players was basically the only response we got. Well, and some others that weren't so nice. Anyway, within a minute or less, I hear that same officer that saw that wreck call it out as a 962 starts asking for things that lead me to believe that this is either on the verge of a fatality or it already is. And for him to call it prior to my arrival to essentially approve all that means that it's probably the latter. So many things are needed when you have a major wreck like this. Fire and EMTs are called, probably before the first officer on the wreck and his rookie in training put their car into park. Hard road closures have to be set up, staffed, and maintained in 4 directions. Specialized units, in this case our MATE guys or our Major Accident Investigations Team, are called in. City crash trucks are called for additional lighting, cones, flares, barricades, signs, and related items to help deal with extended road closures as well as provide lighting for the scene. And detectives are called in to handle the death side of things, then coordinating that with the MATE guys. And at that time of night, none of these people are on duty. These folks are all being woke up and called in from home, which adds a huge lag time in the response. So normally for a regular wreck, or I shouldn't say a regular wreck, a wreck that doesn't involve major injury or death, we do all that we can to clear the roadway so we can keep people moving. But when it's a serious wreck or a fatality like this, everything has to slow down for all the additional investigation that has to take place. I get there as maybe the 2nd or 3rd unit. I don't even think fire had arrived quite yet, and it's a bad one. And it actually turned out to be the worst traffic accident, fatality-wise, that I ever saw. The other units are already setting up flares and cones to divert and block traffic before we get all the hard closures set up. An officer is speaking with the semi-driver, and another is helping the driver of a 3rd vehicle that had been involved. And it soon became apparent while they weren't trying to treat or take care of anybody in that suspect car. So there are 3 young guys in this car, 2 in the front seat and 1 in the back. And when that car entered the intersection, it got T-boned, like I said, in the driver's side by the semi. Well, the dynamics of a crash like this are just cataclysmic. The car was almost unrecognizable. There wasn't a square inch that wasn't damaged or smashed away from the main vehicle. The debris from the demolished car was scattered all over the intersection and the roadway. It had been thrown away from the initial impact with the semi. It hit another vehicle that was going through the intersection. That kind of knocked it back into the intersection where it came to rest. These 3 guys were entombed in the sheet metal of the frame of that car. Their bodies were all still intact for the most part, but they had, some pretty nasty gaping wounds and some protruding broken bones through the skin. But the force of that impact had essentially killed them all 3 instantly. Even if we wanted to try to treat them, there was no way to get at them through all that twisted, jagged metal. And one of them died with their eyes open, that blank, lifeless stare off into nowhere. You look at something like that and determine there's just nothing that can be done until fire can come and start cutting everything open to get these bodies out. So we kept doing other things that we needed to deal with this major accident in a main intersection. I was listening to the radio to make sure another supervisor had arrived at the bar parking lot to take care of that. Fire arrived, offloaded quick, and hurried over to the car to see if there's any indication of life or a viable person. But they soon came to the same conclusion, and there wasn't going to be any life-saving today. They shifted gears and started offloading their cutting and spreading equipment to start the process of getting the bodies out. There was a delay while crime scene photos are taken, measurements are made, and other necessary tasks completed before they are given that okay to extricate. There obviously wasn't a hurry at this point, so they understood and they hung out. Once they did get the go-ahead, it took them an hour to get all 3 of those guys cut out of that wreckage. It was a lot of work. The other work groups and help began to arrive, and I and my folks focused on some other aspects of the incident. Based on the shooting incident at the bar, we needed to determine if there was a firearm floating around, because nothing was found on searching the remains of the vehicle in the surrounding area there in the intersection. So I had to take a couple officers, and we essentially searched the entire stretch of roadway and road sides leading from the bar to the accident scene in case they had pitched something out. Only thing we couldn't search was the small lake that they drove over, but that could be done later if we really believe that there was something there. So there's 2 reasons for taking so much time and effort to do that. First, it's a public safety issue. We don't want some kid or person walking down the sidewalk or chasing a golf ball into the bushes and finding a firearm and getting hurt or hurting somebody. And second, it's part of the investigation, and it needed to be recovered as an important piece of evidence, if at all possible. Well, nothing was found, and we never found out if there had been a firearm involved during this initial incident. With things like this where a confrontation happens in seconds, something can easily appear to be something else. We later found that none of the occupants had been struck by that shot from the officer at the bar either. Given the severity of the accident and how bad it affected traffic for the rest of the evening into the beginning of the morning commute, there was some interest by the news media, and at one point a couple of reporters from the local news outlets came to the scene. And I was tagged to do media until our PIO, or our Public Information Officer, arrived to take over. For many hours, we kept that issue of the shooting portion to ourselves, even though one reporter must have heard something because she was prying pretty hard for that bit of info. I just kept to our story that guys were breaking into cars, they fled, they got hit, and they died during a traffic accident. Later in the day, the PIO took care of adding that other info to the public release and dealt with the additional questions and scrutiny that takes place. This is often how things unfold for police incidents and the news media. I will say that within probably 10 to 15 minutes of starting a call, you know what happened, or you're pretty sure. In this case, we knew within about 2 minutes. When your job entails assessing and fixing problems as quickly as possible, you get pretty good at figuring things out quick. For a number of reasons, none of that speculation or hunch can be disseminated or released until it's been double and triple checked for accuracy. The police department never wants to release inaccurate or false information for a number of reasons. And also some things may need to be put into motion or into place prior to the release of some explosive piece of information where people could be targeted or harassed or flee. Then there's next of kin issues. For incidents involving death or serious injury, releasing certain details may tip the media to release info before we've had a chance to notify the injured people's relatives or family. So when you hear that police spokesman getting asked 100 different questions and answering nearly none with nearly no details, remember, they probably know. They just can't say it yet. It'll make sense the next time you hear of the incident where a girlfriend mysteriously disappears and it's like there's a sign above the boyfriend's head that says, "I killed her." We know it too. We just have to go through the steps. It'll come. While I was involved with this particular investigation for the rest of my shift, for the most part, coordinating the 2 crime scenes and other aspects of management for my officer who had been involved in the shooting. And of course, there were the usual cop humor comments sprinkled throughout the investigation. Well, that's the end of that trend. Was by far the most popular, as varied officers, supervisors, non-police, hose draggers, anybody else had gotten involved. And another one was, well, who's going to claim the number ones? So a number 1 is code for an arrest when you clear a call. So what the guy was saying was that since all 3 of the suspects were essentially caught/died, who was going to claim the stats for catching, quasi-arresting them? That's morbid, but like we've discussed, that's just the way it is. And it actually was the end of the burglary trend from that particular bar, as burglary from vehicle crimes dropped almost completely for quite a while afterward. The driver of the semi-truck and the other vehicle involved in the wreck weren't seriously hurt, and eventually everything was packed up and moved away from the intersection by the end of that morning's rush hour. Traffic went through the intersection again without any knowledge that there had been 3 dead guys smashed inside what used to be a car just hours before. And as I said, it was the worst fatality accident I'd been involved in, and the same was said to me when I talked to a couple old friends who were out there with me. There were other multiple, like 4, 5, 6 car crazy crashes or some really crazy high-speed motorcycle fatalities, but nothing with 3 fatalities in one incident like this one, let alone 3 people in one car. So not that it applies to this story, but with all the multitude of distractions out there now, most of all these stupid cell phones, please remember to concentrate on driving your thousands of pounds of vehicle, if not for you, for the sake of those who care about you and who you care about. There's enough hazards and idiots driving around, so don't fall victim to something that's avoidable. And with that, I close another episode of I Barely Got Here. Thank you for listening, and please check back for new episodes. If you have a question or comment, please let me know via email, ibarelyGotHere@gmail.com. You can check out my social media on Facebook or Instagram, or our webpage, and I'll do my best to address any questions. Sam42 is 10-7.